need practice. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get this webinar going. Cool. Okay. So, like I said, what the future? CLA Career Coaching webinar. It's pretty exciting. So again, today's topic is job and internship searching. And again, if you don't know this about me, well, you probably wouldn't. I do improv comedy and storytelling in my real life. So I try to infuse those kind of principles of like, how can we be real about things, but have some fun with it? And storytelling, that's just the lens that I look through in everyday life. So I'm hoping that we can do that together through this webinar together. But as I go through, please ask questions in the chat box or just share out. There's only 4 of us here right now, so totally fine to start talking or interrupt or ask questions. But just as a note, so the CSU principles of community are still at play, even though we're online. I put this on here because I was afraid of trolls. I'm not going to lie, but these are the CSU principles of community. And I'm hoping that we can infuse these throughout this session. In particular with the Career Center, we are all about identity-based, socially just resources and being real about the rigged system. So we're going to talk a little bit about how those principles are infused into our everyday work and how it relates to your job search. Okay, but with that being said, here's what we're gonna go over today about navigating an uncertain future, career questions and goals, tips for a timely job search strategy, because I know that's relevant for a couple of you right now, and then some resources and action steps so you can feel like, oh, what do I do with this information, and move from there. Okay. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to identify some of your top priorities for your career transition and needs, and create an action plan for that. Then we'll talk a little about working that network as it relates to that career question or goal, and then 2 resources that you can use moving forward. Okay. So with that in mind,
I love Frozen. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's why I was gonna ask, has anybody seen Frozen 2 yet?
My birthday's coming up and I love Olaf, in case anybody cares. And I'll be quarantined on my golden birthday.
No. Okay. Anybody else seen Frozen 2?
No.
No? Okay. It's all right. The soundtrack is I mean, I just love that they have a great plot line. But why I'm using it is because obviously this meme is amazing. And it kind of reflects some of the stuff that's going on in the career world. So I just wanted to acknowledge, especially, you know, it sounds like we've got a few juniors here, but especially seniors who are like figuring out graduation and their next steps after that, or some folks who had a job and now it's not, like they were laid off from their job. There's a lot of uncertainty in both sides of the coin. So I wanted to offer just acknowledgement of those feelings and that they're valid. So I don't know if any of you have experienced any grief in this process, or frustration, or just a sense of rejection or loss, but that's a valid thing to come up during this time. So I don't know about y'all, but it is a little bit stressful to do a job search during an uncertain economy. So I just want to give a couple pointers about some of the employer perspective that might be helpful for you if you're thinking about doing an internship or job search for the summer or for a post-grad career. So something to keep in mind is that employers are just as much in flux as we are. So even if you ask them, like, what are opportunities that are coming up? Even if you asked me in higher education about higher education jobs, a lot of people won't know. And that can be really stressful, right? You're like, dude, you're supposed to know, like, you're the one giving me a job. But that's not necessarily the way it works. So again, when we think about what the future, just know that it's pretty uncertain for employers, and they're just as human as we are right now. So if you're hoping to get solid answers right now, know that it's changing by the hour. Any advice that you get, even from well-meaning mentors or even me as a career coach, could change in an instant. So we're going to talk about ways that we can navigate uncertainty that don't feel dehumanizing, but also are relevant and actually make you feel prepared for those things. So I'm going to do a little breakout room, just again to test this format and see if you're interested. But since there's only 4 of us, I think we can have a small group discussion very briefly. Can you think of a time that that something didn't go the way you expected? That you were like, oh, like that did not work out the way that I thought it would. Like, can everybody think of a time that happened in their lives? Yeah,
I
like whether
think
it
so.
was, yeah, probably like dating even, or in classes, right? We've all been there where we're like, I gave him that card and they did not respond, and then Boo didn't hit me that. Anyway, we've been ghosted, all that stuff happens. So when you think about that uncertainty, what were things that you learned from that experience? Like, what were things that you took away when it didn't work out the way you thought it would? Like, how did you get through that experience?
I would say,
follow like my philosophy of that everything happens for a reason, and so like if it did work out, if it didn't work out, then like you had to roll with it and adjust to it as well. So
there's messaging from all over about what's valid or not, and learning how to trust yourself is the most important thing, and no one can do it alone. So hopefully through this workshop you can figure out different ways that you can, feel more prepared and feel like you've got somebody who's got your back, or a resource or a step that you can take, because the biggest takeaway is that we don't know what's going to happen, and that would be exhausting to just sit in that uncertainty all the time. So hopefully, like I said, with a little bit of strategy and just some information and knowing you're not alone, we can like crush this and keep getting through this uncertain time. But anyway, it's not just that though. So, but with that in mind, I would love for all of you to take about 2 minutes to answer these 3 questions, because it's relevant for everybody in the room, right? But I want you to think about, what is your next career transition or step? And that can be anything. Maybe it's finding a new job to pay my rent right now, or other things. And then I want you to think about, what are 3 fears, questions, or needs that you have regarding that transition? And then lastly, who do you turn to for advice about the future? Okay, so I'm gonna stop recording for a minute and I'm gonna give you a couple more. All right. Okay, so you all brought up some really great transitions, whether it was like going to grad school, not going to grad school. And I want to talk about some of those things. So each of your searches is going to be different, but there were some really great specific questions about, like, what if I'm in an industry that requires a lot of travel? What is the impact of my work on my loved ones and people around me related to COVID? So like, how can I exploring remote work options that might still develop that competency? And also thinking about, am I competent? What? Like, how do I know that? And how do I address that need, right? Whether it's knowing I'm in the right program, or getting extra mentorship, or like you said, finding a summer internship in your field so you can feel more ready for that. So we're gonna dive into all those things, because each of your searches are unique. But I have some comments on each of those things, and I hope some of this stuff will alleviate. But just as a note too, there's some specific things I wanted to mention. In general, whether it's grad school, feeling competent, or like feeling like we belong, that imposter syndrome that sometimes comes up. I also have baby face, so I relate. Or being queer, or like, am I too young? Am I too obnoxious? Like, I have a disability, does that show? There's who we are cannot be removed from our job searches, right? Like, we're the person doing that job. It's not just, oh, this is my career and this is who I am as a person. And frankly, finding a job is a game, and the game is rigged. The game is rigged. We're not all playing by the same rules. We don't have the same resources, and some of these things like COVID are going to bring out those things even more, or an uncertain economy. So you don't have to lose your humanity in the process. Like, I'm hoping that you all become bosses and change that game and the system for how it's already laid out. And I want to give you the resources and insights from this perspective so you can make more informed decisions. But ultimately, you're in charge of that career. Like, you got this. Like, I know that you have the abilities to get through this transition, because you've survived. You have 100% survival rate so far, right? And you have some resources who have got your back if we are still struggle busing through it. So with that, asking for help is hard, but it is possible. We'll talk about some ways you can do that are different levels of risk or vulnerability to ask for help. You do have something valuable to offer to the world. So something you brought up was, Spencer, you were like, oh my gosh, I have a myriad of life experiences and in a ton of different industries, and I'm trying to figure out how that applies to what I'm doing next. But again, who you are and how those stories have shaped who you've become is valuable in and of itself. And if you're wondering, how do I translate these competencies that I have into this specific industry? Woo, like come in, like we've got some resources to help you translate that story, whether it's an interview, a cover letter, a resume. And I have liberal arts students who are like, I don't have any work experience. Like, how do I find a job? And so it's finding out those relevant parts of your story that you want to showcase for employers or for grad schools to help make those decisions. Your major does not determine the rest of your life or career. I can't emphasize that enough. I have a theater major in med school. So regardless of, both of you mentioned interest in grad school. Grad school is a great place to get that competency even further developed, right? And even if you wake up tomorrow and you're like, I want to be a graphic designer. Okay, like let's talk about different ways that you can become a graphic designer, whether that's grad school or not. And maybe your timelines will be influenced by some of those decisions, whether it's related to the uncertain economy or not, and things like that. So, and lastly, your job does not determine your worth as a person, and we're all on different timelines. So it doesn't matter if you're 27 or 2, it would be a disservice to your story if we put ourselves on this weird timeline without reckoning with what brought us to this place in the first place. And again, this is just me on a pedestal and like busting some myths, and there are so many other wiser folks out there who are talking about this stuff. But your salary does not determine your worth as a human being, and your priorities and timeline might look different than your neighbors, and that's okay. So this is just me like it's okay, and no one has it figured out and no one's perfect. Little blinkers. But are there any thoughts about these Mythbusters that maybe you're like, I don't know that resonates with me, or this is kind of hard for me to get through?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
You're like, nope, this
relate to all of it.
Okay, good. Okay. So with all that stuff, let's talk a little bit about those priorities. So we were talking a little bit about major life decisions, whether to grad school or not to grad school. What if my industry is all about travel? And this is where we get into some like cool strategy pieces. So the number one thing that I talk about with students who come to my office, because I don't care what industry you're in, this is relevant. Getting clear on your priorities and your timeline for those decisions is super important. So if you're like, I don't even know where to start, or I have all these emails and I don't know what to do with them, right? If you're thinking about your job search or grad school decisions, this is the number one thing you can do for yourself. So getting clear on your priorities of what are my top needs right now and when do I need to address them, and writing them down, right? So some of you might have rent that's due on June 1st and you're like, I need to get a job that can cover my rent for that period, and that's valid. Others might be like, I'm thinking about long-term goals. Like you said, I'm a junior, grad school or not grad school. And we can talk about what are those intermediate steps I can take to make that decision. Like maybe breaking it down to what would I do after grad school, right? Like what is it that I want to do and it's necessary to go right now, or could I get some experience before I get in there, right? And a gap year is a really great idea. But, again, gap years to get more experience or develop those competencies, ooh, that is awesome. Or go straight ahead and you can figure out what makes sense to you. Haley, you brought up some great points about making a decision related to location versus, I think you said versus financial aid. Let's hang out and talk about that specifically. But yeah, another thing to consider with grad school is what is the curriculum, right? What are their alumni doing in that program? Because if you're about to invest some moolah into it, you best believe that they have a good placement rate, right? So we can talk about how to figure that out and look up those grad schools to learn those things. But yeah, like, is this worth it? Or could I get the same experience somewhere else? It's a great question. And we won't know. I think it's good to get prepared just in case, but we won't know for a while. And it's okay to apply and change your mind later. But if that deadline passes and then you're like, actually, I do want to apply, it's a lot harder, right? So maybe thinking about how can I find the programs I'm interested in, figuring out their deadlines, and then working backwards to make a decision-making timeline from there. Yeah? Okay, even if it's like, in the next month, I'm gonna figure out what are 3 positions I could do after grad school and what degrees would align with that. That's an awesome goal. And then you can go from there. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
You said to like figure out what their alumni are doing. Do they have a high placement rate? How would we know that? Or how would you find that out?
great question. So typically and now it depends on the program. I'm totally qualified with all that stuff. But typically admissions officers are very motivated to get students in, right? Like it's an admissions office. A grad school admissions is the same piece. So it is absolutely acceptable to contact admissions folks at programs that you're interested in and ask them those questions and say, hey, do you happen to know the placement rate for this program? And again, whether it's a professional program versus research versus academia, some folks are in anthropology and going into field work. There's a wide variety, but it's absolutely okay to contact the admissions office and ask them. If they're not informed, again, depending on if you're doing research versus practice, it depends. But you can also go on LinkedIn, and I'll show you how to do that. You can go on LinkedIn, search that specific grad program, and be like, what are those alumni saying that they're doing? Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's the admissions office, the faculty in the program, and LinkedIn. But admissions hopefully will be on point, and we'll have that ready to go. Not all of them are created equal, though, and all programs are different. Yes.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to use your resources with like a drop-in to help. If you're like, what are my specific needs? Come in and we can talk through a strategy for figuring that out too.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. But with that in mind, again, grad school is very different than a job search. But for a job search, get clear on your priorities first, especially for search engines. So location, job type, paid or unpaid, and some keywords. And if you're struggling with any of those pieces, we can practice that when we get to the next section. And I promise we're blitzing through this because I recognize we've got like 15 minutes. So no worries, like I'm recognizing what time it is and we'll work through it. But yeah, so if nothing else, if you just write down what are my must-haves, what are my would-be nices, and my absolutely nots, and putting that on a timeline is really helpful. Later on in the resources section, we're going to talk about, I mentioned in the must-have, like start date before June. If you are struggling with your landlord and you have lost income and you're figuring out what negotiations you have with your lease, I highly encourage you to check out the legal services. They're working with a lot of students right now, and I've got a link at the end, but they are working with students to negotiate their lease contracts and figure out what is the wiggle room or not. Or if you had a job offer and it was totally rescinded for an internship for the summer, for example, you can figure out if it was a verbal offer, probably not a lot of standing room, but if it was a written offer, you might have some negotiation room. So know your rights. That is my big push. Know your rights. And I don't know what your rights are, but the legal services does. So that's why they help.
Okay.
Awesome. But yeah, write down must have, would be nice, absolutely not. And by what time do I need these things? Cool. Okay. That might help because I know all of you are like, what are these decisions? I don't know. Okay. Quick tip. So job search time, how do I spread it out? Why do you think 60% of your job search time should be devoted to networking?
Because it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right. That's social capital piece, right? Like I know Bill Gates, but Bill Gates does not know me. Bill Gates cannot help me in my job search, right? Right? But if we start connecting with the people that we know first, like you all mentioned a mentor or a staff member on campus or a faculty member, whether it's through LinkedIn or other means, that carries a lot of weight. And that's long into your life. Like that's a forever thing. So if you're noticing in your industry that there's a big freeze on hiring, because that's probably temporary while employers are in shock, right? Like they're trying to figure out what's going on. They don't want to make offers that they can't follow through on. So a great thing to do in the meantime, again, is networking just to get yourself ready for it. Again, if you were to initiate a conversation right now, they might be like, I don't know what's going on. But even just to say, I want to learn about careers in social work and can you tell me more? They're totally open to that conversation. But if you're like, are you hiring right now? They might be like, I don't know, but stay tuned. Okay, so paying attention to that, and if any of you want to learn more about networking, there's going to be a session next week about building your socially distant career community. So we can get into the weeds for that one. Okay, with that time, because some of you mentioned like your routine is off, a job search is a routine too. A grad school search, those big decisions are a routine too. So something that a student said she would love to do is a job search task of the week. So I encourage you to embrace some of that spirit for yourself in ways that make sense to you. Maybe it's putting time in your calendar for a job search or making it a project. Like this is your time to make it your own. But help yourself hold yourself accountable, maybe even by having friends that you check in with about it, but make it your project. As a tactical thing, when in doubt, finish your resume and upload it to Handshake and create a LinkedIn. That could be a whole session on itself. We have a million resources for how to do that we'll go over at the end. And again, we'll talk about keyword searches. When in doubt, if you see positions that you're like, this was super cool, but I wasn't qualified. If you meet at least 70% of the qualifications and you're excited about the position, apply. I want you to err on the side of bold, of yes, like I'm setting myself up for as many yeses as possible, which also means more rejection, but that's okay. Let them tell you no before, like if you don't give them a chance, they can't tell you no, right? So make sure that you set up for yourself as much success as possible. And do not stop applying until you have signed or started. So Ivan, you mentioned, like, what about travel and how will that impact? Yes, I want you to keep applying until you have started that position and you have legal grounds to contest if they try to negotiate that contract away. Okay, so paying attention to that. And if you know folks in the industry, you can connect with them to ask, like, how is travel a part of this or what's going on? And that's totally acceptable.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions about this piece? Again, that's my like rapid fire, like what to do real quick, stuff to do. But I want to briefly walk through the websites just so you get more comfortable with them. Okay, so Handshake. How many of you have been on Handshake before?
Yes.
Yay! Okay, so when in doubt, Google CSU Career Center. This is what pops up, Career.colostate.edu. This is your hub for all of our resources, whether it's our resources section, whether it's we've gone virtual, make an appointment with us. If you want to do a virtual drop-in, click this chat with us box and it walks you through how to do it, okay? But as I mentioned, we're looking at jobs. So if you click jobs up at the top, it takes you directly to Handshake. So always, when in doubt, start your search for a job or an internship with Handshake. You might not finish it with Handshake, but you're always going to want to start with Handshake. So like I said, if we're looking for jobs, Handshake is really user-friendly, which is awesome. But it'll take you to this portal, and always start here because this is where employers who want to hire CSU students post jobs and internships. So we're going to filter, right? Some of you mentioned looking for remote work, so I'm going to put remote. I still highly recommend flexjobs.com for remote work searching, but Handshake is also a great resource. Filters, paid roles only. I do not recommend only filtering by your major, just because you have so many different interests and opportunities that might not be captured with just that filter. So for now, let's start with paid roles only and remote. And there's 354 jobs. What? That's awesome. But some of you might have more specific interests. So one of you mentioned community outreach. So I'll put that in here. Let's see what happens. Paid gigs and community outreach. Awesome. Great. But you're like, I only want to be in Fort Collins. Great. Then we're going to put Fort Collins so they don't tell you about jobs in New York City. Not 50 miles, but 5 miles. Let's see. Awesome. There's still 8 jobs in here. Okay. So let's say that these are your parameters. You're like, I know for sure this location in this kind of position. Then you can click save your search right here, and it'll set up an automatic job alert. So once a week, you'll get notified. So when in doubt, this is the easiest thing that you can do. And no matter what, make sure that you fill out your profile. Employers are 10 times more likely to see your profile and what you're looking for if you fill it in with your experience. Okay. Again, flexjobs.com is an amazing resource, and CSU alumni is great for networking. Again, stay tuned next week for the networking piece, but just so you know that that's a resource there. And again, so in-person, socially distanced. So how many of you feel like you don't have people that are in the industry, like that you could talk to who are in the industries you're curious about? You're like, I don't know who I'd talk to if I wanted to learn about travel and in this industry. Yeah?
I feel like in my specific instance, I think a lot of my professors I take issue with, but I think I have really good professors that I've connected with, and I know a lot of other people in the field who are social workers, who have all been great in supporting me and connecting me. So
that's awesome. Okay. Well, if you're in the in-between or still thinking about should I grad school or not, it might be a good idea to talk to somebody who's been through the grad school program, right? So on LinkedIn, again, I didn't pull it up yet, but on LinkedIn, if you search for the university and then go to their alumni page on the left-hand side, you can easily find those alums, and I'll walk through that afterwards too, just so we can do it together. Okay. And what you're doing when you reach out to strangers on the internet is essentially asking for something formal called an informational interview, which is just, can you please talk to me about your life and what you do? Please help. Like, I just want to know about your life so I can make my big life decisions. Thank you. So there's obviously more formal ways of saying that, and we have resources for what that could look like, which are all available on our website. Okay. And then lastly, look out for digital career events. So these are posted actively on the Career Center page, and we're actually hosting something at the end of April, so stay tuned. Okay, lastly, how many of you have heard of Marie Kondo? Like The Magic of Tidying Up on Netflix?
No.
Yes, okay. She is a wizard, and she talks a lot about sparking joy. We didn't get into that today. That'll be in the storytelling webinar. But I'm a big fan of staying organized during a job search, right? So I highly recommend that you come up with a system that makes sense to you for staying organized with your applications, even with its grad school, right? So this is a sample tracker. I'm happy to send it to you all after this session, but it's a basic Excel spreadsheet so that you can stay organized. So as you apply to grad schools or get more research on those different programs, make sure you're documenting it because you'll thank yourself later. Also, if you talk to a career coach, right, you can come in and say, this is how many I applied to and when and what happened, so that we can make a more informed strategy versus, I think I applied to some, I don't know how many or where or when.
Yeah.
Woo, right? Maybe the deadline hasn't passed yet, or maybe you're looking at the wrong site, or maybe you're only applying for CEO jobs. I don't know. Or maybe you're only getting to the interview. Then we might need to work on your interview skills. So that way you can be more strategic. All right, interview prep. If you are getting the interview stage and you're like, why am I not doing well? Or something to expect during this time is more virtual engagement, right? And some of us are more comfortable than others with doing online interviews or things like that. So I highly encourage you to check out Big Interview. So this is on the Career Center page, but Big Interview, I call her Janet. She has a power suit. It's a pre-recorded lady that asks you questions, and you can choose which questions you want to ask. And you can record yourself doing a mock interview. We also can do a mock interview with you during virtual drop-in, but know that Big Interview is totally available and awesome. So it's a good resource. And please do not prepare a dance for an interview. Okay, for this piece, so if you're like, what can the Career Center do to support me during this time? I hope you all know that in your corner is the Career Center. So one-on-ones are awesome. Like, that's where we have appointments. They're all virtual right now. And my calendar has been wide open because students are really just figuring out classes. So know that we're available. We're here, we're with you. And we also have drop-ins Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We did before this happened, and we still have them. So just know that we're here and we've got your back. If you don't want to make a phone call, you can just do it on Handshake. You can easily make an appointment with us. And all of this is on our website. So if you're like, I don't know how to do it, just go to our website and we've made it super easy. Okay, all righty. Some additional resources that may or may not be relevant for you that I just wanted to mention during this time. Career Center newsletters, they come to you weekly. If you don't see them, please check your spam folder. But that is where we put like current job postings. We obviously have a big filter right now for part-time jobs that are hiring right now. So please check that out. We also have our online resource center on the website. Again, CSU Student Legal Services, so you can talk through those pieces. If you're having trouble with accessibility in your classroom, please go to the Disability Center website. They have a reporting function on there. Tilt Academic Success is doing a lot of great websites or webinars too, so that you can feel successful during this time. If you are dealing with food insecurity, Rams Against Hunger is ramping up its digital resources to get more messaging out to students, but there's a link right there, or go to the SLICE website and it all should be there. And lastly, if any of you or your friends are quarantining in a non-affirmative LGBTQ environment, this is a fabulous article from them, which is a really cool website. But I'm sure the Pride Resource Center also has great website materials. But just know, like, you do not have to go through it alone. And these are some great perspectives if you are in a space that is not affirming who you are. So we've got your back, and you're not alone, but just know that. Yeah, go ahead.
That's so weird. I just raised my hand on a video. I also just wanted to add, I don't know, I also question how people that may be in domestic violence situations are handling this quarantine, and I'm curious if the WGAC is doing anything on that as well.
They probably are.
They're really great, so I'm sure they are, but.
Yeah, but that's right, and I will add it to this resource list. That's a good point. So I know yeah, honestly, I'm not on their listserv, so thank you, and I'll definitely add it on here. Yeah, because it's valid.
They definitely are doing a lot of work around that.
Okay.
Yeah, I know they're really great in everything they do, so.
But pretty much, yeah. So I was like, let's add them to this list so that we can make sure that students are seeing different things. Okay, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Right. So as a last step, I want you all to think about what is one thing that you will do for your career development by Sunday. And that could even be like, I'm going to write down my priorities, or I'm going to figure out how I'm going to make this major decision about grad school. It could be, I'm going to make a LinkedIn or go to a career center drop-in, or do anything, right? Like, what's one action step that you can take by Sunday?
Make a list.
Yeah, what's your list? What's your list gonna be?
I'm still trying to adjust to, like, doing like online school and stuff like that now. And I think I just need to implement my own routine. So just making a list of what I need to do every day, and start actually using my my little planner now. Geez, I was totally spacing out on that. But yeah, so like making a list, especially like now that I'm trying to look at my grad school plan kind of thing. So trying to figure out how to get started with that and just putting it down.
Maybe to see what they did, to see like if I should do the same things and what that looks like. And yeah.
Heck yeah. I love it.
So I have 2, maybe 3.
Ooh, okay,
always
let's get
extra.
dangerous.
But one, so I started like an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, technically it's a Google sheet, but whatever. Of like the different schools I wanted to go to, like what you showed, and like the different things I think I would be interested in. As far as like, yeah, like that, but for grad school.
Exactly.
And I need to actually go and fill it in now. 2, I think just getting a job for like time now. I'm gonna look at Handshake and see if I can work via remotely, or what other jobs are like available.
Yeah.
And then 3, I have like a really lengthy resume, and I was thinking about like scheduling an appointment with the Career Center to have it like looked at / like drop in hours. Because
it will take you 20 minutes. Do it.
Yo, I've like literally had a job for since I was like 16. There's like so many different like fields I've been a part of. So
that just tells me that you have a rich story that deserves to be told in the most effective way possible. And I want you to get support to figure out how to do that, because I don't want you to have a 10-page resume.
Well, not to be like weird, but like I think my main concern is like I was a mortician for 8 years, and how do I put that on a resume and not weird people out?
You know what? I talked to folks who have worked in forensic labs, or who worked in zoos, in just those areas of the zoo. Students who were on medical rotations that were awkward, or veterans who were figuring out, how do I talk about my military experience? So boo, you have a story, and absolutely, like, thinking about how do I take these competencies and translate it is really important. So you obviously learn those skills that are not just, I touched dead people, right? Like, I genuinely, like, I had to think quickly. I had to be sensitive in this environment. I had to probably work long hours or have a lot of attention to detail. There are probably a lot of admin pieces. So we can talk you through your story and figure out how do we do this in a bullet point. Yeah, but you're right. It's awkward. Oh, it's so awkward. You should not have to do that alone. Yes. The most awkward resumes I've seen. Oh my gosh. Yes. Or farmers who are like, I picked up things or I did. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. How do we talk about that? Okay, so thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to end the recording now, but if there's any questions or stuff, do not hesitate to reach out, right? Like I am a resource on purpose. And if I'm not the right person, I will make sure you get to the right person. You're not going to get bounced around, but I'm so excited to see all the things that you're doing. And I just want you to change the world. That's it. Okay.
Is this your email, Kelsey?
Huh?